Superman famously fights for truth, justice, and the American way. But what about those times he said screw it and just destroyed whatever stood in his way? These are the most messed up things Superman has ever done. When Zack Snyder rebooted the Superman franchise for the silver screen in 2013 with Man of Steel, it inspired its fair share of controversy, to say the least. The Henry Cavill-starring film had a much darker tone than the typical optimistic big-screen Superman adventure. This included altering canonical moments in an attempt to add nuance and complexity to an otherwise straight and narrow character. One such moment occurs early in the film when an impending tornado tears through Smallville. As most people run for cover, Jonathan Kent takes the tornado head-on in order to save the family dog. When it becomes clear that this is a fatal decision, Clark remains on the sidelines, screaming in anguish as his adoptive father gently holds out his arm, signaling to his son not to use his powers to save him.
He was convinced that I had to wait, that the world was not ready.
Snyder intended for this to be a touching moment of a father's sacrifice to protect his superpowered son from revealing his true nature. It lays the foundation for the audience that in this world, humankind can't yet be trusted with Superman as their savior. It also adds some texture that previous adaptations simply don't include. For comparison, in 1978's Superman, Jonathan dies from a heart attack. While we can appreciate the ambitious leap that Snyder took with Man of Steel, it doesn't change how unsettling it is to see Superman standing by and doing nothing as his father dies right in front of him. While Jonathan Kent's death in Man of Steel raised a lot of eyebrows, it wasn't even the most controversial moment in that movie. After a hard-fought battle between Superman and the Kryptonians, the final stand comes down between General Zod and the Boy in Blue. When Zod refuses to stand down and threatens to kill an innocent family, Superman sees no other choice but to end the General with a fatal neck snap. The shocking horror of this moment derives from the idea that Superman usually draws the line at killing, no matter how monstrous his enemies are. For a long time in the DC universe, the difference between the heroes and villains could be found in the fine line between killing and seeking justice within the bounds of the law. But Snyder's film blurred that line. Zod's death by Superman's hands quickly became a major source of contention among fans, and a symbol of how this cinematic era of Clark Kent had perhaps gone astray. In the opening moments of the 2006 movie Superman Returns, Brandon Routh's version of Clark Kent comes crashing back into Earth. He's been gone for 5 years after a failed search for surviving Kryptonians, and while Martha Kent is happy to see her son again, Lois Lane has a decidedly different reaction. She's written a Pulitzer Prize-winning article titled Why the World Doesn't Need Superman, so it's fair to say that she harbors some animosity over his absence. That's particularly understandable considering that he left her while she was pregnant without so much as a goodbye, let alone an explanation of where he was going. To be fair to Superman, he's a busy guy with planets to visit and people to save, but when it comes to the woman he loves and mother of his child, she surely deserved at least a heads up. But instead, Clark abandoned the love of his life with no warning and became an absentee father to their son, Jason.
I moved on. So did the rest of us.
We never got to see how the future turned out for Clark, Lois, and Jason, as Warner Brothers declined to make a sequel to Superman Returns, but at least the movie provided a little bit of closure when Lois and Clark reunite and he dutifully assumes his role as a father. The idea of a fascist Superman has inspired plenty of superhero lovers and creators over the decades. Zack Snyder's version is perhaps the most famous example. But there have also been unforgettable versions of the character on the comic book page. Perhaps the most notable example is the series Injustice: Gods Among Us, and its animated movie adaptation, which delivers on this premise in the most visceral and violent fashion possible. In the comic, the Joker uses a custom blend of poison mixed with kryptonite on Superman, which leads him to confuse a pregnant Lois Lane for Doomsday. This vicious trick results in Superman unknowingly killing Lois and their unborn child, as well as setting off a nuclear weapon that destroys Metropolis. Overcome with rage, grief, and guilt, Superman then punches a hole right through Joker's chest, and soon thereafter, he uses his powers to command authority over the world.
And the world will burn.
Undoubtedly, Superman killing Joker under these circumstances is pretty understandable, if not necessarily entirely justified. However, it's hard to excuse his decision to rule over Earth as a dictator and betraying the trust that humankind has placed in him. Plus, early versions of Superman famously fought against fascists, so it feels particularly hypocritical for him to embody those ideals no matter what drove him to that point. 1987's Superman 4: The Quest for Peace is widely regarded as the worst Superman movie of all time. Considering its loathsome reputation, it's probably not too surprising that it features a pretty shocking decision from our hero. Reflecting the Cold War sentiments of the day, Superman 4 leans into the threat of nuclear weapons and an impending arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union. The main bad guy is a creation of Lex Luthor's named Nuclear Man, whose powers require exposure to sunlight. Following a climactic battle between Superman and Nuclear Man in which Supes ends up buried inside the moon, the Man of Steel eventually manages to free himself and then pushes the moon off its axis to create an eclipse over Earth and thereby defeat his opponent. Nuclear Man's plans are now thwarted, but at what cost? By taking the moon out of its orbit, Superman would have altered Earth's gravity and caused natural catastrophes across the globe. We can understand that this was a dire situation, but surely Superman had a few more options at his disposal besides throwing an entire planet into disarray.
I just wish you could all see the Earth the way that I see it.
Throughout 1983's Superman 3, Clark Kent endearingly rekindles his relationship with his childhood friend Lana Lang. After saving her young son Ricky, he offers the boy a chance to meet his hero by telling Lana that he and Superman are pretty close. But then, the celebratory nature of Superman's visit is ruined when he suddenly turns cold and says something disturbing to a visibly unsettled Lana.
It's unusual finding a good-looking girl like you alone like this.
While sitting uncomfortably close to Lana with unblinking intensity, Superman couldn't be creepier if he tried. As it turns out, the flawed kryptonite that he was given in an earlier scene has made him selfish and detached, which explains the sinister vibes with Lana. This scene is even more unsettling considering how much it contrasts with the reputation of the actor who played Clark Kent. Behind the scenes, Christopher Reeve was an inspiring humanitarian and all-around good guy, just like the hero he played. And nobody wants to see such a decent guy suddenly turn irredeemably creepy. When DC Comics hired writer and artist John Byrne to take over the reins of Superman in 1985, our boy in blue was in desperate need of an overhaul. After nearly 50 years on the page, he was certainly overdue for a makeover, so Byrne delivered by making Superman edgier, more extroverted, and a bit of a super Republican in the image of Ronald Reagan's America. His final issue, Superman number 22, featured a moment that was particularly emblematic of his time with DC, which is to say, it went a little too far. After a sequence of time manipulations, the ancient villain Time Trapper creates a pocket universe that has been destroyed by 3 Kryptonians. When Superman faces off with this trio, he's horrified by the destruction they've caused, especially given his kinship to them as the last son of Krypton. Seeing no other choice, he declares, "As the last representative of law and justice on this world, it falls to me to act as judge, jury, and executioner." Then he unleashes a fatal dose of green kryptonite, which was thought to have been extinguished on Pocket Earth. This troubling set of events could be justified given the circumstances, although Superman's dismissal of the basic pillars of a democratic justice system still shakes us to the core. In addition to the Man of Steel once again breaking his code against killing, his use of authoritarian justice goes against the very American ideals that he has usually always stood for. In the very first issue of Superman's first solo comic series, his co-creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster gave readers an early taste of their hero's wavering ethics in a rather bizarre fashion. After overhearing a college football coach's plan to hire ringers to play in a must-win game, Superman decides that he's the perfect man for the job. Then he has the good fortune of finding a student who looks just like himself, so he drugs the kid, which paralyzes him from the waist down, and then he takes to the field and predictably decimates the competition. Let's ignore for a moment the fact that Superman could have easily killed the opposing team if he wanted to, as this whole situation somehow gets even worse. That's because members of the mob are betting on the game, and they decide to kidnap the new star player, although they mistakenly take the student that Superman drugged earlier. Clark knows that all of this is happening, but he doesn't do a single thing about it. But hey, at least his team won, right?
Hell no.
Action Comics number 8 weighed in on the perpetual debate of nature versus nurture by having Superman take an interest in the criminal trial of a young boy whose mother insists to the court that her son is not to blame for his actions. Rather, she claims the responsibility lies with the tenement housing they reside in. Failing to find any fault in this logic, Superman then decides that destroying the slums is the only way to end crime in Metropolis. The residents of the tenements then flee for their lives and helplessly look on as Superman destroys their homes. The National Guard is called in to relieve the situation, but without any luck, as Superman knows best after all. In the end, the slums are replaced with some gorgeous apartments, although it's not clear how the residents could possibly afford these swanky new digs. What we do know, though, is that crime in Metropolis will continue despite these better accommodations. In 1943, the United States and the rest of the Allies were deep in the throes of World War II, battling their enemies in Europe and the Pacific Theater. In an attempt to rile up citizens back home to support the war financially and politically, Superman stepped into the propaganda machine with Action Comics number 58. Published in March 1943, the cover of this issue depicts Superman manning a printing press, rolling out a large poster that includes an ethnic slur for Japanese people and a racist caricature.
Oh, hell no.
It's perhaps far too easy to excuse this sort of message as being part of the war effort, but even within that context, it's a bit problematic. At this time, thousands of American citizens were forcibly imprisoned in internment camps across the country simply for being of Japanese descent. For the Japanese-American kids subject to this inhumane treatment, seeing Superman condone violence in this manner would have just added salt to the wound. Being patriotic doesn't mean dehumanizing others, and Superman, of all people, should know that.